As President Bola Tanimu presents the 2025 budget of 50 trillion naira, what does this mean for Nigerians? Does it fully capture the economic reality of the Nigerian economy, still staggering in the woods with malignant economic headwinds, leaving more than 70% of Nigerians in a chronic multidimensional poverty? The man in the center of it all, the Director General, Budget Office of the Federation, Tanimu Yakubu, joins us now on Prime Time. Glad to have you join us, DG.
Thank you very much.
And just like
pleased to be here.
Good, fantastic. Just like you had that the question in the minds of Nigerians is, this is paper. How does it affect the life of Nigerians? Especially when the president says he wants to reduce inflation from 34.6% to 15%. That looks like a tall order. How does he intend to do this?
Well, thank you very much. It is very important to understand that the national budget is always supposed to be a solution to the country's yawning social, economic, and political challenges. What we have on the ground is a situation in which the country over the decades was growing its wealth and was not investing enough to secure the wealth. In terms of the investments we have made in infrastructure, both industrial, social, and others, in terms of the population itself. And I will give you a very good example. In 1970, Nigeria's population was 57 million people. Military expenditure was 5% of the GDP, not even of the federal budget. We had 250,000 troops across the three services. Exactly 54 years later, military expenditure is not more than 0.4%, not of the GDP, but of the federal budget. Our population has increased to 230 million people. The people who put their lives on the line to secure our own lives and protect our properties are about half the number they were in 1970. The criminal elements saw the gaps and moved in to occupy spaces and made them ungovernable. There are places, though they are increasingly decreasing in number as a result of the successes being recorded by the security forces, but we still have them. We have spaces where terrorists are collecting taxes, where federal and state and local government jurisdictions have been effectively ousted. It is for this reason that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu decided to prioritize the military and the security sector.
We'll probably talk about, I am particularly interested, and I mean Nigerians will be, how he intends to crash inflation from 34.6%
to 15%.
To 15%.
Yes. The reasons are quite clear. We used to spend up to 30% of our foreign exchange to import refined petroleum products. With the takeoff of the Dangote refinery, certainly we'll spend a lot less. The successes that have been recorded in reducing the number of ungoverned spaces all over the country enabled farmers to return to work. And we expected a bumper harvest this year. Mr. President has also decided to spend 120 billion naira to flood the country, in particular public hospitals, with free drugs, and also to provide medicines that are particularly for indigent patients, people with life-threatening diseases like tuberculosis, HIV, and the rest of them, but are unable to afford the cost of such drugs. These are some of the factors that drive inflation.
Okay, maybe
in particular, you also need to know that the Dangote and other refineries will not only be meeting the domestic supply gap, they are also going to be exporting refined products, which will bring in additional export revenue. What it means is that we will have more revenue than we ever had. As a matter of fact, as we are speaking today, Nigeria's foreign reserves is almost $42 billion.
We'll talk about that. I mean, that's the good news. But there's a downside to it. But still on inflation, I mean, when you listen to experts talk, what it will require will be mopping up money in the system. I mean, through fiscal policies, monetary policies of the government. But the major problem is that there is no money in the system. So if there's no money in the system and they can't mop it up, where then is the money?
I will tell you where the money is going to come from. In the budget for 2025, capital expenditure is almost 52% of the net capital budget adjusted for debt. We have never had it as high as 25% in recent years. These jobs are going to be executed, and that is what will create demand for labor, for cement, for other inputs that go into the production of infrastructure.
Now, you talked about agriculture a little while ago there. The president also talked about food security, not being negotiable. But as you and I sit and talk, the farmers can't go to their farms because of insecurity. Now, you cannot talk about food security without dealing with security. So when he talks about food security not being negotiable, one is wondering.
What he meant is simple. And it is for that reason that security is actually proclaiming the largest chunk of the budget provision, as high as 6 trillion naira. What he means is that these ungoverned spaces all over the country, in the Niger Delta creeks, in the northwest, where bandits have taken over, in the northeast, where we used to have very serious security challenges that undermined the farmers' ability to go back to the farm. As we are speaking, an increasing number of those spaces have been significantly reduced. He wants to take the country to a situation whereby there is an absolute military defeat of bandits and people are able to return to work. We have seen that this is not just a propaganda. We have seen that farmers were able to return to their farmlands last year, and that is what has generated the bumper harvest that is increasingly bringing down the cost of food. Secondly, Mr. President has set aside 127 billion naira to increase the production of fertilizers that used to be at a historic high of 400,000 metric tons per annum to 1.2 million metric tons per annum. You can see that there is a plan to address the factors that will increase food production, and that will also have a salutary effect on the amount that used to be set aside to buy foreign exchange and import food.
From time, experts say that our budgets over time have been incremental, always increasing. But then you don't have commensurate deliverables on the ground to show for this increment. I mean, some have said that the budget is a budget of government, for the government, by the government. 85% of this budget returns back to the designers, whereas the private sector, who should drive the economy of the nation, takes crumbs.
Well, the fact of the matter is that the spending is going to stimulate demand for services by both the private sector and other players in the economy. You need to remember that the economy is categorized into households, government, and the business sector. What has happened is that over the years, the household consumption went down. The public consumption, that is government expenditure, went down. Private sector expenditure also went down. So this budget has hit a historic high to inject spending that will boost the production of industrial, agricultural, and other goods and services. Also, the emphasis on security is that some of the events, some of the economic activities that take place, like nightlife, which could be as high as 25% of the GDP, but which because of insecurity is probably significantly less today. Mr. President is deploying the security services to ensure that nightlife is back, our weekly markets are back, our highway markets are back, and what it means is that people from the top to the down will be able to pursue the basic functions of production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services.
Okay, again, let's go back, piggyback to agriculture. Agriculture is supposed to be a comparative advantage, so to say. But what you find from the president's reading of the budget is that he's concentrating on reducing imports, but then not really bolstering exports, agriculture, and then you're wondering, why are we
Mr. President, for the first time in Nigeria's economic history, is funding development finance institutions, Nexim Bank, Bank of Agriculture, Bank of Industry, and others, with 3 trillion naira. And 50% of the funds that will be allocated to BOI, Bank of Industry, and Nexim Bank will be for the stimulation of exportable agricultural produce. 50% will be for import substitution activities in the country. So you can see that there is a specific plan that is aimed at boosting production, earning more foreign exchange for no reason but stabilize the economy, produce jobs, and put food on the table.
Because I was just going to ask you, if the president is doing all this, or are you saying he's going to do it, why are prices? Because what concerns...
There is a lag between the time economic policies are conceived and implemented and the time that they begin to generate positive effects. There is an attitude in the minds of people who believe in that things are not changing. When they have changed, they begin to buy things in anticipation that the prices are going to go up. So until they see that there are no shortages, and when they find out that this is the true, this is the fact, they would open their stores, and flood the market with more supply.
Now you've talked about implementation. That seems to be the main problem that our budget in the country over the years seem to encounter. In fact, I was discussing with an expert, and he said to me that a bad budget with strategic plan can turn to a good budget. But a good budget without a strategic plan of implementation can become bad. So why do we have this challenge of implementation of our budget? And who really should monitor the budget? And are they monitoring it?
In 2025, the function of budget monitoring and evaluation, located in the office of the Director General, Budget Office of Federation.
That's your office?
Yes, that is my office. Will be done in a manner that will ensure that no project with federal funding will be without a project consultant. This is a major implementation strategy.
How would that help?
It will help because payment certificates are normally processed and forwarded by the MDS. When you have a project consultant on the ground, he also assesses the financial and physical performance of that budget. We also have monitoring and evaluation officers in the budget office. So until we see that the 3 reports generated all agree that work has been done, no payment will be effected.
And this is new?
This is new. At least in the last decade, because we are trying to go back to when things were really done to standards.
Now the budget presentation was delayed. And from what I heard the National Assembly say, I mean, some of them in their interviews, they said they're going for holidays. So with this delay, does that mean the January to December timeline, the president has knocked it off? Because, in fact,
the budget presentation was not delayed. If it exceeded today, then it would have been delayed. And the Constitution anticipates that there could be factors to delay the budget, either because the executive arm of government and the National Assembly do not agree, or for some other reasons. For this, the Constitution allows Mr. President to spend a quarter of his capital budget in the first quarter. So even if the budget was actually approved, if things are normal, he would hardly spend more than what the Constitution allows him to, to fund. Therefore, we do not envisage that as a result of any failure, which I don't think is going to happen. You have to remember that the government and the National Assembly are from the same political party. The philosophies that you see espoused in this budget were not Mr. President's alone. The National Assembly, through its principal leaders, made enormous contributions. So we believe that this is a budget that will reaffirm the integration of efforts and ideas to move the country forward.
Let's go back a wee bit to we're still in 2024.
We are.
Yeah. I was trying to run ahead of time. But the 2024 budget has been extended by 6 months from the President of the Senate, Babio. He said that. Now, that automatically means 2025 will also be extended.
We are not.
An obvious fallout of
2025
I know.
yet. The implementation strategies in 2025, I have told you, are going to be different from the implementation strategies of 2024.
And then again, there has been an underperformance of the 2024 budget. 50% for capital, 48% for recurrent, leaving a wide gap of 50% underperformance. That's a recipe, you would say, for underdevelopment. Why is underperformance only 50% of 2020? I mean, we'll soon go into 2025.
The Federal Ministry of Finance is still making payments. Certificates for works done are still being submitted. What it means is that we wouldn't know how much has actually been achieved in terms of the targets you alluded to until the year has closed, until the Treasury has closed. The physical works have been done, and we measure performance when we see that payments have been done. Therefore, the percentage performance that Mr. President presented was a snapshot. We expect it to be substantially improved by the time the Honorable Minister of Finance closes the Treasury on the 31st day of December, 22. And the payment will still continue into the new year. Yes.
Okay. Now, 42 billion US dollars. Good news. I mean, that's what we have in our coffers. This raises the value of the Naira when you factor in. The question is, will this raise the value of the Naira when you factor in the balance of trade deficit?
Well, now we don't have a trade deficit. We actually have a trade surplus of about 6 trillion Naira.
5.8, okay.
Yes, it hasn't happened in a long time. The economy is changing for the better. Those metrics that you refer to of a positive balance of trade and a rise in foreign exchange underscores the fact that the claim of a successful economic management is real. It's not a hoax.
That's the good news, $42 billion in our coffers. But the bad news is that we're spending more than we're earning. No way a country is going to develop like that.
Well,
why 15 trillion
why do
deficit.
we create credit in the first instance? Entrepreneurs do not have capital, they have ideas. Banks exist to intermediate between suppliers of capital, that means households and other investors with surplus cash, and entrepreneurs who have nothing but ideas. That is what banking does, to bring the two together. For the other sector to provide the funds that entrepreneurs need to be able to produce goods and services. Deficit spending, provided it is targeted at increasing capacity utilization, provided it is directed at non-inflationary spending, is actually what you need to achieve an economic turnaround. We think next year is going to be different in terms of both revenue and expenditure. Mr. President has fiscal buffers in his mind. Not everything has gone into the budget. He is still thinking about other ways that could bring revenue. For example, insisting that the cost of production in the upstream oil and gas, which is about the highest in the world, is by all means necessary brought down.
How is he going to bring it down?
He is going to bring it down because, if I will cite an example.
Okay, go ahead.
Nigeria has sunk investments in pipelines that connect the various oil fields to the export terminals. And then suddenly, on account of insecurity, those investments were condemned and barges at additional cost were brought in. This is going to stop. Mr. President has committed to bringing down significantly the cost of production in the upstream oil and gas. When you reduce cost, you are also increasing revenue. When you raise output, you are also increasing revenue. That's why I believe 2025 will be a turning point for Nigeria's economic recovery.
Is it not the same thing we hear every year?
You did not have a Tanimu in the presidency until now. You did not have a Tanimu Yakubu in the budget office until now. I belong to a tradition, and we saw it manifest itself under the late President Umaru Yar'Adua, who also had President Bola Ahmed Tinubu as a principal advisor. When we came into office, we inherited an output of 900,000 barrels per day. That was what Muhammad Buhari inherited from President Jonathan Goodluck. That is what President Bola Ahmed Tinubu inherited from President Muhammadu Buhari. We took oil production to as high as 2.4 million barrels per day. And we were able, in 2 years, to double Nigeria's reserves. We inherited 34 million reserves, foreign reserves, and by the time the late president was no longer in office, it had gone as high as 62 billion barrels. I need to tell you that during that period, every Tuesday of the month, I was on errand to Lagos to consult with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And every last week of the month, he would come to Abuja. So he was very much a key factor in the events, in the policies that actually made Umaru Yar'Adua's administration, yes.
As we begin to round up, there's the question of more than half of the projected revenue going into debt servicing, not even debt payment.
Well, government is a continuous
And we're still
process.
And we're still borrowing.
Government is a continuous process. Do not make a moral judgment to say whether the borrowing of the by the past administration was good or wrong. But you inherited debts that you must service. You cannot run away. There are other good things that you inherited from the previous administration. So would you claim credit for those and then condemn the borrowing? Perhaps a portion of the borrowing or all of it was responsible for the production of the goods that you inherited from the previous administration.
So are you saying then that this
what we need to do is to produce sufficient revenue to actually exit the loans?
With a monoproduct, you talked about agriculture.
In agriculture, you see, the budget doesn't contain everything that a government plans to do. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu intends to introduce regional marketing boards.
And what's that about?
Regional marketing boards, if you remember, will not be new in Nigeria. We had the regional commodity boards. What they were doing was that they were preparing our agricultural export for shipment to ensure that they met the quality expectations of the importers. And let me tell you what happened. In the mid-1986, in the wake of the structural adjustment program, when we tried to approach the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund for budget support facilities, they gave us certain conditions. Do this, do that. You recall that there was an uproar by Nigerians which prevented the then military administration from taking the loans. But the then military administration went ahead to implement some of those conditions under what was called a homegrown structural adjustment program. One of the things that it did was to close down those regional commodity boards. And the private sector, which was said to have matured at that time, stepped in to fill the gap. In the next 6 months, because they were adulterating the export with impurities, the world moved on and away from Nigerian agricultural export. That was what happened. So the idea of reintroducing regional commodity exchanges is to bridge that gap in quality assurance. It's not everything that you could export that would be acceptable, to foreign market. It has to meet their quality expectations. And that is why export in Nigeria is nowhere close to what it ought to be.
Yeah, just in less than 30 seconds. I mean, we've been speaking English and talking about the budget, but the ordinary man on the street wants his foot to calm down and not these figures we're bandying about. What would you tell the ordinary man?
You see, when projects and programs are being implemented, they demand, among other things, labor. The laborers in turn buy food. The equipment and machinery that are used need fuel, need drivers, need laborers. Once a budget is implemented this way, it generates series of demand that ensures that people who are ordinarily or normally idle are now engaged and they are earning income. That is what enables them to go to the market, buy food, and bring it home and put on the table.
Director General, Budget Office of the Federation of Nigeria, Yakubu Tanimu, thank you for your time. Our hope is that 2025 is around the corner, that Nigerians will begin to at least smile with this budget of restorations that the President has presented today.
By God's grace.
Thank you so much for being on the program.